So how have you been, Situ?
Doing all right, Andy. Summer just flew by. Got a lot of research off the ground and then back to business. Another semester has gotten going.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind me telling a story. It's funny. I was telling you about TA, and I was all proud of the work Shanti and I had been doing there with diesel pricing, and you had that just patient look on your face and twinkle in your eye, and you tell me, well, yeah, that's interesting because I've written two papers on retail fuel, um, which was fantastic. And then the practicum, the semester, that work you did for TA, the team was amazing. So I want to tell that story.
Terrific. Yep. Good morning to all of you. I see people still trickling in. Let's just give it a minute and then we'll get going.
Perfect.
మీరెలా అక్కడ కూర్చోండి నేను ఇక్కడ నాచోస్
Okay, folks, we are 2 minutes in. I think we should get going. So welcome to the first event of CABI, the Center for Analytics and Business Insights. For this academic year, it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of our ex-board members and a good friend, Andy Sweet. So we have a lunch and learn today. Let me give a brief introduction to Andy and then hand over. Andy Sweet is a tech entrepreneur with a track record of building and successfully exiting tech ventures. Andy is the co-founder and CEO of Cognitive Spark, an AI and management consulting firm recently acquired by
WashU call, and those of you who are joining in. So I'll try to.
Folks, can you please mute yourself? We can hear you. Andy is the co-founder and CEO of Cognitive Spark, an AI and management consulting firm recently acquired by AnswerRocket. Early in his career, he co-founded and served as CEO of Visual Software Integration, which was acquired by Compete. Andy has served as the Chief Technology Officer at a few startups, And between these startups, he spent 13 years as an executive at IBM and as a senior leader at Doherty Business Solutions. Andy is currently Vice President, Enterprise AI Solutions at AnswerRocket. He is leading a team focused on delivering AI solutions that create tangible business outcomes. Andy's expertise spans data and AI, with particular strength in scaling organizations from concept to market leadership. Andy is known for building high-performance teams and identifying market opportunities before they reach mainstream awareness. With that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Andy. And just as a last bit of information, Andy, I already said, has been a board member and a big friend and supporter of CABI over the years. Over to you, Andy. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, Setu, Professor thank you so much. Like you said, we've been working together for quite a while. I have to give a quick story for everybody. And Shanti Greene has joined me as well. We were doing some work with Travel Centers of America. Those big truck stops that you see on the side of the highway. They compete with Love's, Pilot Flying J, and we actually, if you buy fuel from them today, diesel fuel, priced by algorithms, Shanti and team put together, takes into account weather, traffic patterns, competitor pricing. Anyway, I was describing the solution to Professor Setu, and he just looked at me like anybody who knows him had that patient smile, twinkle in his eye, and said, "Andy, I've written 2 papers on that subject," and I knew right away from that point on, it was going to be a great collaboration. And one of the things you're going to see here is I know there'll probably be people from outside the St. Louis region, but CABI is a real gem and a real value to our region. And I love the practical plus the academic, what's the art of the possible, bringing those things together. So again, Katie and Professor Setu, thank you for having us join. The way we'd like to do this session is really interactive. I would hate for Shanti and I to talk for an hour and a half, and you have to listen to that. As entertaining as we are, please feel free to interrupt. I may not see you, so if somebody can kind of help me make sure we stop and see those questions, that would be great. I really do appreciate the kind intro that you gave me. As you can see here, I am very St. Louis focused. Now, this picture I use, because the first time I ever used this was in about 2007. And I used it, and then I used it again in 2010, and we won the World Series. So I feel like it's a lucky picture. And if you've been following the Cardinals lately, we probably need luck, maybe a little more than luck. But so I keep using this picture in the hope that next year will be the year. Now, I have to tell you that the little girl on the left with the sunglasses is now 27 at a startup in Austin. The little girl on the right is actually a teacher in the Lindbergh school system. My wife looks exactly the same. She hasn't changed a bit. I'm also a wannabe farmer. In my free time, I spend time out in Williamsburg thinking about AI, but mostly about fishing and just hanging out and playing with tractors. So that's a little bit who I am. What Shanti and I want to do, and I'll let him introduce himself, is just a very practical, tactical, what we're seeing in the industry. We found there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of information that's very much what you could do, what you might do, what you should do, but not what people have done and the lessons learned. And that's very much what we want to do today. And so with that, Shanti, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
So I'm leading the data science and AI innovation area, which is a fun way to say a mouthful of things where we try to use data to help companies make really good decisions. When Andy said we're trying to get a band back together, I said, well, when do I get to come on board? And the answer was as soon as we could. Although I still do some things in some other places, I'm really focused on what can we do to drive innovation at AnswerRocket and to get adoption of some of this AI technology that everybody likes talking about, but can't always find the right enterprise use case for. Previously, I led AI and data strategy for Sept, so somewhat of a global consulting company. I also have founded Cyberstream Studios where I do AI generated music videos and they're all about data science and AI topics. So if you want to learn about transformers or backpropagation, I've got the right songs for you. The videos are not quite up to par yet. I also do some 3D printing. The important things about me are that I love technology. So very much a technologist. I'm always trying out and playing with new technologies to understand what companies might want to use and what actually makes sense. I use like 5 different IDs right now because I'm always trying to say, like, who's got the best features? Which ones actually make sense? I'm a reasonably good tennis player, although I just got injured again, so maybe not. And a very bad, it says mediocre Olympic weightlifter. I'm a really bad Olympic weightlifter. Haven't done it for a while. I was a slightly better than mediocre strongman for a bit, but no longer. But yeah, we're trying to do really good and fun things.
Awesome. Love it, Shanti. And so again, the idea today, and let's make this interactive, it's just a practical discussion of AI lessons learned. Just recently, I'm sure many have seen the MIT report where it says 95% of generative AI projects fail to deliver meaningful results. By the way, whenever I see that, the mathematician, statistician, yeah, how did they get to that? I always wonder. But no matter where you go, and what you look at, you're seeing statistics very similar to this. And we want to talk about, again, very practical, what we're seeing, why we're seeing these kinds of statistics, and more importantly, maybe how you can be successful with your AI projects as you embark on that journey or have already undergone that journey. The reason we wanted to talk a little bit about ourselves is kind of so you get to know us a little bit, get to know AnswerRocket a little bit, just so you have a sense of where we're coming from an experience perspective. We are working across industries and we're very focused on AI. AnswerRocket was actually founded in 2013. Our founder, Alon Goran, said, why can't I more easily talk to my data using English language? This was obviously pre-LLMs, pre-ChatGPT, et cetera. And so they headed down that journey. And, in that seminal moment when GPT dropped, a lot of people thought AnswerRocket was dead. Instead, we embraced large language models and are now using them to extend not just our consulting practice, but our product as well. And again, the idea here simply is that we have been lucky enough to work with some of the largest organizations across the globe, but we're also working very much in mid-cap companies. And I want to talk a little bit about that. The last thing is we're very focused on building a St. Louis office. We're looking at office space. So if anybody knows of good space that we could leverage, please feel free to reach out. But we're hiring here in St. Louis. We have St. Louis clients, and again, are very focused on the region. And we think CABI is going to be a core partner for us to help do that. So with that, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's any questions, comments. Perfect. So it's kind of interesting what we're seeing in the market today. And we're working with a client, a benefits admin client on the East Coast. And they're really in this whole CEO mandate. And what happened to them, and we're starting to see more and more of this, is they lost a key client to a competitor that they really didn't know existed. And it didn't start the way the rest of their competitors started. It was a technology first company that happened to be in their space. And the client told them, look, there's some things, some capabilities that this competitor has that you just aren't caught up on. And so the mandate came down from the CEO. We need to start to drive AI. Now, what can happen with that then is everybody starts to scramble, right? Maybe you start to build a new AI team and you hire a VP of AI or a director of AI. And really the challenge there becomes you have this, it's not always the case, but it can be an appendage to your organization. It's not coordinated with the business. There's a lack of business expertise and domain expertise and really understanding how the business works. And so you have this AI team off to the side, and oftentimes they fail because they don't make that integration in. Or you might have, and again, these aren't mutually exclusive, you might have shadow AI emerge in lines of business. And I don't mean this to anybody who's in marketing, but oftentimes marketing will go out and reach out and start to build capability potentially with the vendor and their point solutions that aren't really integrated as a whole. So you start to see the shadow AI IT almost emerge in lines of businesses, again, not coordinated in an overall strategy. Or you start to engage the hyperscalers, and you quickly realize they're trying to lock you into a solution suite, and there's capabilities that are really, really good, but there's areas of immaturity. So you're locked into this hyperscaler, and you're not able to, what we call, kind of float with the tide as the water goes up, as there's improvements across the board. Maybe it's, with Anthropic, maybe it's with OpenAI, maybe it's with whoever. You want to be able to catch that tide where you can. And frankly, the result is that 95% or whatever number you pick and whatever study you choose is that lack of progress, and more importantly, lack of business results, not really moving the needle. And there's some real downside to that, not just the wasted investment, but what we're starting to see at AnswerRocket is lessons learned that aren't true lessons being propagated into the market about what large language models can do, can't do. And it's almost mythical in what's happening. And it's in our view starting to stunt innovation. So, there's a real opportunity here, and the focus of this conversation is going to be how you get around these obstacles, how you start very practically, and move forward and scale within your organization. So again, I want to pause here maybe for a little longer to see if there's any observations, questions. Give time for people to go off mute. Anything you want to add here, Shanti?
Yeah, I mean, I think shadow AI is really interesting. There's some stats about like 47% of AI in organizations being untracked, and that's something that bothers the InfoSec and security teams. And I think at some point, and I can't decide when it is, it's around 1,000 people when an enterprise gets so large that they start caring more about securing what they think they have than they do about innovating and trying to figure out what's next. And they really do stifle innovation in trying out new technology. And they need a balance to figure out, how do we actually get these technologies into the organization in a way that makes sense without putting the organization at undue risk, so that you don't have shadow AI. I mean, I've seen entire shadow data warehouses because IT teams were too slow to move. So, how do you get over some of that inertia and allow the business to make gains and actually test out new technology? Some of it, and the reason you see it in marketing, is because they have very quantifiable things that they measure, right? They're going to send out a promotion and then measure the immediate ROI on that. Whereas your IT team doesn't have that. They don't have those immediate things that they can measure, so they're a little less quick to adopt.
So got a couple of questions here. LOB is line of business, and I violated, one of my cardinal rules of presentation with acronyms. So thank you for that question. That's lines of business. And I think I saw a question around operating model, and we definitely hit this. And I think a couple of things here from an operating model perspective. I think it can make sense to start with a centralized AI team to launch, but that AI team has to immediately embed itself into the problems of the business and identify where the hotspots are. So we talk about this a little bit later, of really start to understand what's happening across the business. And I talked about that company in the Northeast around benefit administration. We pulled all the businesses together, and they have multiple parts of their business, and came together and did two things. One is identified high value opportunities within the business where they can start to apply AI, but more importantly, what is the model and how we implement those solutions to capture those opportunities. And it is starting with a centralized team, but then that centralized team will go off into the business. So almost cycling into the business, getting deep in an area of the business, cycling back up to a centralized organization, and continuing that process, iterating. So you're developing a team that has the AI expertise, but they're building the business expertise. And I think that, kind of goes to a point we're going to make a little bit later. If you're a AI technologist or a technologist today, and this may sound like a blinding statement of the obvious, but Shanti and I see all the time where people are very good with a particular set of technologies, but they really aren't deep experts in the business. And today, you really need to have both. So if you're a technologist, learn the business. If you're on the business side, definitely start to leverage AI, maybe in your personal life, but start to develop your own expertise, your own points of view. So I used a lot of words to say, that operating model, if you start central, I think disseminating it into and quickly getting involved with lines of business and their problems and having a holistic view of the business opportunities across the organization is critically important.
One question I had, so it's interesting. We've taken a slightly as similar but slightly different approach in our organization. I'd love to hear your perspectives on the good or
Yeah.
the bad on either side. So we have a generative AI team. We have a traditional data science team as well. But in our generative AI team, instead of us going out and leaning in with the business, we have actually taken the approach of the business areas we're working with join the team for the duration of our rollout. So it's teaching them the AI skills, but also so that they can go back and continue to evolve and iterate. But then it's not us convincing the business. There's that vested ownership because they help define the business cases, the prompts, and have learned those skills along the way. Thoughts on that as a comparison to kind of building that centralized team and then going out versus bringing business stakeholders in full time as part of the team?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it accomplishes kind of that second where you're taking the AI team and cycling them into the business. You're just kind of do it in kind of the reverse, you reverse the arrows, if you will. And I think that accomplishes what we're talking about, because if during that process the centralized Gen AI and centralized data science teams are actually learning from the business, then you're accomplishing and avoiding that, uncoordinated with the business, lack of domain expertise, lack of business acumen problem. You're just doing it in reverse. And, one of the downsides of just decentralizing completely too early is you start to put AI professionals into the line of business, and they may not have a career ladder, an HR set of steps, and so their career can stall or they feel isolated, and the people around them, quote, and we've seen this, don't understand me. I'm in supply chain and they're all supply chain experts, but they don't get what I'm trying to do with my career and grow my skills. But with your approach, they stay centralized, but they're learning the business. Shanti, did you want to add anything to that? I think that's a perfectly reasonable approach.
Absolutely. You need to find a way to get that domain knowledge into the technical team. And whether it's the technical team joining into the domain or the domain team coming, either way, I like thinking about the old Venn diagram of like what makes a data scientist with like some math and stat and some computer science and some domain knowledge. And it really is, how do you figure out how to get those things together? And there's a few different ways to do it. You just need to make sure you bring it all together at some point.
Let me ask a quick question. So you said you have a separate Gen AI team and a separate data science team. Do you have visions of those teams coming together?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of cross-pollination. I think, honestly, to hit speed to market, we have stood up that dedicated team. But honestly, I see it effectively becoming two data science teams or whatever organizational as we're cross-pollinating those skills. But being able, given that CEO mandate that a lot of us have gone through in one regard or another, it was easier to build and not reprioritize, to just say, okay, we have dedicated resources that are pushing forward some of these objectives while we're training the organization around us.
Makes sense. And I apologize. All I can see is my presentation. What organization are you with? I'm just curious.
Sorry, Schnook Markets. Schnook's here in St. Louis.
Yeah. Tom Henry and team.
Yep. Yeah, he's my boss.
Yeah, very good. Um, so yeah, that's why I love too, by the way, talking to St. Louis. We all probably know each other, no more than two levels of indirection, maybe three. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And we can talk a little bit about that, about how we're seeing a combination of large language models plus traditional ML models now being tools that are function called by a large language model so that you can interact with kind of your traditional models in a more natural language kind of approach. And again, multiple clients are doing that kind of work. Any other questions, comments, observations?
Andy, we had one more question in the chat. Can we,
Awesome.
and it's from Prad. He says, can we get a nice AI material to refer for?
A nice AI material.
And he may be able to give a little bit more insight.
Yeah, I need, sorry.
Brad, do you want to unmute yourself and
Hey,
clarify
hi.
that question?
Hey, hi there.
Hi.
I'm sorry about that. I think I was unable to unmute, so that's the
No
reason.
problem. No problem.
No, I I know that. Thank you very much for arranging this call, and it's really appreciate to understand what is the state of AI at the moment in enterprise, and obviously we are using most of the places for AI in our applications as well as our most of our part of our applications and the big domain side. But I just wanted to understand what are the best way of using AI, because I know that we have so many applications are there in terms of Copilot. We have the different chat GPT and all those. Honestly speaking, when we talked about how much of percentage is the data is correct, never know actually. So how do we understand, how do we identify? Do we need to do any sort of the case study, or do we have any material to understand how we can just consider whether the whatever the data we are choosing, is it correct using the
Yeah, so great question. And Shanti, I'd love for you to hop in on this. And this is probably where we spend most of our time, right? And the thing I would encourage you to do, and we actually talk about this a little later, but this is the perfect time to ask the question, is start with the business problem or opportunity. Oftentimes what we see when we have to come in and kind of unwind things is somebody started with, okay, we just want to get something in the door. Maybe it's Copilot. Maybe it's an enterprise license with GPT or Anthropic or Gemini, whoever the case may be. And then it's almost like a hammer looking for a nail. And then, you got to figure out, okay, what data do I need for that nail? I'm probably stretching the analogy further than it can go. Start with the business problem. What are you trying to solve in the business? And then figure out, okay, what is the best solution for that? Sometimes it's not even AI or even machine learning. It might be traditional analytics. So what is the best solution? And if it is some version of a model, what is the best model? Is it a machine learning problem? Is it a large language model problem? And then what is your risk profile? Do you want to run your large language model internally? Are you comfortable with, an enterprise license that gives you a walled off version of your own flagship model? But the short answer is start with the business problem, understand that. And one of the things we do with our engagements, by the way, is then we evaluate the data for anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the complexity. And then we have a go, no go gate. So if we don't have the data, let's say we decide to do a machine learning model, let's say it's around customer lifetime value. And we're going to make this part of an overall large language model solution where that customer lifetime value model can be called with natural language processing through the LLM, but then it function calls our machine learning model. If we don't have that data, and we're actually doing this with the large irrigation company, they sell irrigation parts, they're based out of Israel, and so putting together your AI projects in a way where you have go, no go gates, and you don't just march off a cliff and make it like the traditional, we're going to go 12 weeks come no matter what, have it chunked up, evaluate the data. And the other thing I would just say really quick, and again, Shanti, I promise I'm going to turn this over to you, is third-party data today is much easier to get to, much more reasonable in its price, and can be very enriching to whatever kinds of models you're building and solutions you're building. So obsess with the problem, obsess with the business problem, identify the right solution, and don't reverse that is oftentimes a big challenge we see. But Shanti, do you want to?
Yeah, also, I mean, part of this is why you want to have a team so that Andy can obsess over the business problem, make sure we're trying to solve the right thing. And then I heard a second part of your question, which is about like, how do I know I'm using the right tool? And there's a couple of different components to that piece, which is, do I have the right underlying model for whatever it is I'm trying to do? And you can go large, you can go small, like lots of different choices there. And then capabilities layered on top of that in, do I buy a pre-bundled tool? Do I build my own tool? All of that will depend on what exactly that use case is. If you are trying to do something simple for your business, and I say simple in somewhat of a vague way, but I want to summarize some documents, right? Like call it a law firm, because I don't mind getting in some trouble around should we do this for legal purposes or not. And we just want to summarize cases or summarize things that we've already done and be able to put something together for clients. Summary is super easy. Lots of different models can do that. You don't need a large model. You can pretty much throw it in any tool as long as you're comfortable with where that data is going. So maybe you deal with some internal versus external questions, but any tool can handle that problem. Somewhat easy choice. You start to get into more complex things. Like, oh, I don't want to just summarize it. Now I want to summarize it, look at what's in the summary, maybe have a model make a decision, and then send that data somewhere else to, I don't know, draw some pretty pictures about what I saw in that data. Now I need something that can make a decision. There's some thinking that has to happen, thinking in quotes there. And then I need some ability to write some code to create the graphics. Changes what set of tools you're going to put together. Now, do I buy something off the shelf, or it's a relatively straightforward set of things that are happening there. It's really more of a workflow than an agent per se. So you could probably get away building that on minimal infrastructure without too much deep knowledge of what's going on. But those are the kinds of decisions you have to start then making. Looking at that use case, saying, all right, if we can solve this for our business in a reasonable way with automation, with AI, then we're going to either make more money or spend less money. And really the two reasons businesses should consider doing a thing. Great, I'm now solving the right problem. And now go into, well, how do I solve that problem? What's the best way to solve this problem? And you're probably going to need to test a few things, build out a few different ways of doing it, and start measuring them against each other.
Awesome.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much. Actually, it's really helpful to understand how we can, use AI tool and get the nice structure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That kind of cut to the heart of things. And we hit on some of these in answering the question already. But again, start with the business and then pick the right model for the problem. And the other thing is, don't obsess on picking the perfect model, because we're about to talk about how quickly the market's changing, right? And so, obsess more on the problem, then identify the right model. And really, where the market's going now is moving beyond, RAG, which is, kind of the basic approach of how we've been using large language models. I ask it to build me some marketing material. It writes some interesting marketing material. But really, the value of AI, I'll just tell a quick story. So to celebrate my oldest daughter getting engaged, is we decided to take a trip to Vienna. And so I did the typical dad thing. I said, what are some interesting things to do in Vienna and Budapest? And it did the fun part, right? The fun part is coming up with all the sights to see and, et cetera. And in Budapest, go to Fisherman's Bastion, but I had to do all the hard stuff. And then I was left all night the next day and for 3 days figuring out, okay, what flights do I need? What hotels do I need? What trains do I need to get to Budapest? Where do I get off at the train station? All the hard stuff. That should be flipped on its head. And that's what agentic AI, where it actually goes out and says, okay, I'm going to do the fun part and figure out what I want to do. And you're going to go do the drudgery. And again, what I would encourage you to do as you're thinking about these solutions in your business is have humans do what they do best. And we'll talk about this a little more, but start to take that mundane out of how you operate your business, so that not only improving accuracy and velocity in your business, you're improving the employee experience, right? The smart companies that, yep, go ahead.
I was just saying, you picked a perfect example. I actually was reading a comparison of Grok 4 versus GPT-5 specifically for your example of planning a trip. Now, it wasn't Vienna. I think they were doing somewhere in Italy. But one of the interesting things was showing how different models will either choose to like try to schedule you down to the minute versus give you a more overarching view of like things you might enjoy and actually giving you some free time. And that's where the individual model difference might be a choice you care about making. If you go through and say, okay, I need that for my business application. Like we actually need that level of specificity where we're scheduling down to the minute, pick the one that did that versus, oh, we need to be a little more humanistic, give people more freedom, pick the model that has that. And that's kind of the personality of a model or whatever we want to call it, the compunality. I don't want to humanize it too much.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And, it almost kind of bleeds into a little bit. And thank you, Situ. I like that. I want AI to do my laundry, not to create my business strategy. And that really, that's it, right? I mean, we're having AI do not just the fun stuff, but actually doing some of the work that's very, is more of a grind. We're working with a home builder out of Nashville, Tennessee, and that was really the insightful question that the CEO of the company had is like, how do I improve my employees? Like this certain part of the process is just brutal. And I almost have to move people in and out of the business because they can only do that for so long before they burn out. Can't I have AI do the stuff that burns my people out and have my people do the things that really motivates them, that they love to do, and that requires human thinking? And it's kind of a joy when you run across those companies versus somebody asking you, okay, can we, start to replace headcount with AI? That's not an interesting question in my view. It might be to others, right? I'm not passing any sort of judgment, but the interesting questions are, how can I use AI to improve how my employees work, improve their experience with the company, all the while improving velocity and speed through the process, right? And in their particular case, it's, how do you acquire land quicker? How do you underwrite that land, turn it into a subdivision quicker? And there's a lot of monotony through that process. And having AI not just improve the velocity, but take the monotony out. We also talked a little bit about this model integration, and it's kind of interesting. We're working with a large retailer, and they have built a number of very sophisticated customer lifetime value models that predict, the likelihood of you getting a credit card, and then what is the next step along the way in your journey, your customer journey, and giving you the appropriate nudges, all the things you would expect that a retailer would have from an analytics perspective. But what they wanted to do is incorporate a large language model across the top, because what was happening is the data science teams were getting inundated with questions, and the business would iterate. You'd give an answer back, almost like this, Oracle of Delphi kind of thing. You go and you ask the question, and as much as you try to self-serve that with dashboards, no matter how many dashboards you create, it always seems like you need two more. So it's always an N+2 problem versus giving the business the ability to interact and talk to those models. So that's kind of where we're at, is helping with that last mile of data science, of connecting those models to the right people at the right time so they can interact with them in a way that's very natural for them. We all know, or it's commonly known that these models are stochastic. Large language models are stochastic. And that means, they're good at things of being somewhat creative, which is great if you're asking it, hey, write me some creative marketing material for this new market we're trying to penetrate, this new geography, this new product, this new SKU. It's not so great if you're asking it, okay, how did we perform last quarter in a particular geography, and it starts to get a little creative. So again, that's where you can start to set context with these models, but also have deterministic models that it calls. So when you ask a question like that. It may do a function call to some analytics, a machine learning model, SQL, whatever the case may be, so that it returns that answer exactly at every time the same exact way. So you're function calling in, and again, a lot of times people aren't familiar, and we can kind of go into this if there's questions. Large language models can actually function call out to blocks of code that actually do actions on behalf of the model. I'm gonna kind of pause there and see if there's questions. Shanti, anything you want to add on that top row before we hit the bottom row?
Yeah, Sethi, you mentioned that RAG was a big hot topic at the AI Core conference. I'm curious what direction people were going with that. I have some strong thoughts about RAG and its incapabilities for many things, but I'm curious what people were saying at the conference.
Well, it turns out there were, lots and lots of talks on that topic in the more technical minded sessions. This is what I was trying to say. So I didn't necessarily go to those sessions to actually tell you, what was being discussed.
Yeah, no problem. So it's one of the first techniques we really had for trying to minimize hallucinations. The idea is that you basically stand up a vector store, you have you turn your words into vectorized embeddings and you search for them, and then you summarize the ones you've searched for. Theoretically, this works pretty well. It just turns out that the actual vectorization in the embedding search isn't as good as you'd like it to be. And it's not any better than something like Elasticsearch, which actually is phenomenal for folks who haven't used it. It's fast, it finds the thing you're looking for, and then just throw a summary on top of that to find your document. But it really was designed because the models were just making things up. So it's like, well, could it at least, rather than just make things up, summarize a small chunk of data? But yeah, most of the faults people are finding happen in the retrieval piece of RAG. The generative piece is pretty straightforward. Once the retrieval works, it just doesn't work as well as people hope.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it seemed like the talks were presenting alternative ways of fixing some of these issues. That was the technical nature of these talks.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense then. But yeah, it's important, right? You have these big knowledge bases you want to search. Luckily, context windows are getting larger. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, well, do I need to actually search a knowledge base, or can I just shove it all into context? And if I can shove it all into context, then it's right there. How do I make sure that the model's actually using the context is a somewhat open question still. Models will still try to make things up because they think they know them. And that's kind of its own interesting topic. But yeah, these are really interesting. One of the biggest problems I see enterprise-wide in terms of why are you prevented from achieving ROI is that you pick a use case that is very difficult to measure. You pick an internal use case. You pick something like developer productivity. Great use case for generative AI. Generative AI is fantastic at writing code. I can make developers more productive, probably, by giving them access to this tool, or at least they can build more code or slightly better code. But it's really difficult to measure because we don't have a strong baseline. And if you don't have a strong baseline, how will you know that you're actually getting lift above something?
Yeah, I love that. It goes directly into so yeah, we'll hit that question. Organizational blind spots when deploying AI at scale, and we'll hit on a couple of those. That's a great question. But Shanti, you were just talking about use case scoping and really being able to understand the business value. One of the things we found is sometimes we're brought in, and I have a particular kind of interesting company in mind in the banking space, and they were making money, but they had no way, they didn't have a good baseline, to Shanti's point, and so they didn't realize they were actually seeing gains. They were losing the gains in some other initiatives that they had. So, sometimes you think you're not making progress and you really are. So having that benchmark is critically important. And again, we could talk about the techniques we've used, and if you're interested in that, we can definitely take that offline because that's a whole topic. But just realize that you need to have a strong sense of how things are performing, and then what you're looking to achieve from a use case perspective. And oftentimes, Shanti, you and I talk about this all the time. There's certain use cases where you just have to be better than a human at a particular thing, right? And so if you pick Travel Centers of America, for example, we didn't have to pick the perfect diesel price for a particular location, right? There is a theoretical perfect price. All we had to do is set a better price than humans had been traditionally predicting and show improvement over human performance, which we were able to do. And ultimately, TA got bought by BP. But that goes to the question I just saw. This isn't going to be a perfectly comprehensive answer, but when you start to do this at scale, there's a couple of things that are non-technical in nature. And number one is building the right organizational capability, having the right skills, and having the right operating model, that the previous question, so that you're building the skill ahead of your needs. And that skill has that combination of business acumen plus technical acumen. The other thing I would just say, where we see clients stumble a bit, is organizational change management. Almost by definition, when models work well, they violate human intuition, right? And so again, I'm just going to pick on TA. Typically in the diesel industry, prices would move a couple of times a month by very small increments. There was times when we would raise the prices, and I'm just kind of make up some numbers, but they're close, they're directionally accurate, 15 cents in the morning, and then we would drop it 20 cents in the evening, because that's where it found the price sensitivity. And it created, as you might suspect, some consternation, I'll just put it that way, with site operators. They're watching their prices fluctuate all around, while their competitor across the street, they can literally see the sign and it's staying the same, right? But we showed over time that actually was an effective approach. And what's interesting, we only changed it twice a day, because that's primarily, most states only allow you to change it twice a day. If we could have done it more often, we would have. So this notion of organizational change management, organizational operating capability is critically important as you go forward. And the other thing I would just argue to go at scale is having executive, senior leadership, sponsorship. This can't be something that's outside of their purview and something operating within the organization. It's got to be something that they are very involved with, and it has to be incorporated into the business. It's a core part of how you're executing your strategy. It's not, we have an AI strategy. We have a revenue optimization strategy, and here's the areas where AI is going to help us achieve what we're trying to achieve with that strategy. Did that answer the question? And Shanti, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a critical point to make. It's trying to reinforce it, I guess, more than anything else.
Yeah, and integration into existing stack and workflows. Again, I'm just going to pick on TA because it's right in front of us. Is so not only did the model generate a price, but it would automate the price going to the dispensers, the pumps, as well as the sign. So it was integrated into the overall process. So it wasn't like a separate thing. It started with a human in the loop. And so the human would see the price, they would enter the price in SAP, then SAP would take over and it would push the prices. The interesting thing with that, by the way, is there's whether they intended to or not, when we raised prices, they were unbelievably slow in entering the price change. When we would drop prices, which they felt was going to drive more revenue, they would enter it right away. So automating it also took out some human bias, which is just kind of a separate, interesting kind of thing that occurred. But starting with a human in the loop and then having it fully integrated, fully automated. And by the way, that doesn't make sense for all workflows in all situations. And we'll talk about that as well. But again, I'm just going to pause there and see if there's any other observations, questions from the group. Awesome. So this is kind of what we were talking about. This is commonly called the bitter lesson. And we're seeing it, right? GPT-5 just dropped. There's going to be a continuous advancement of these models and what you can do. And so the real idea here, again, it goes back to don't obsess on the model, don't obsess on the technology, obsess on the business problem and start applying the right models at the right time. And so at the end of the day, you're generating ROI. And the other thing is avoid lock-in with a particular model. And again, that's not to say that moving between let's say, Anthropic to OpenAI or to Gemini, there's going to be some impact. But the reality is what you want to do is focus really on that business problem, apply the right model at the right time, and allow the advancements with these models to kind of raise your boat on your behalf. And so you're taking advantage of these changes, but you're not banking on any particular model. Again, I'll just pause here. Shanti, I know this is kind of a key area for you. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think something that a lot of companies forget is when something doesn't work, they don't revisit it. And in this particular scenario, it's changing so quickly that just because it didn't work last month or 3 months ago doesn't mean it won't work next month. And that's always been part of like the data science life cycle where we go do something, we try it, it doesn't work out, we go back and try it again later. But it's not always been part of the enterprise planning life cycle. They like to go, we tried it, it didn't work, we're going to go back to whatever it was we were doing before. Well, the capabilities don't just change linearly anymore. The capabilities are changing somewhat exponentially. And this is really fun. I was in a marketing roundtable. We're talking about AI being used for technology, and this was 8 months ago or so at the time. And we were discussing how using AI for image generation works. It kind of works, but it kind of loses the context, and you can't get your text and images in the same thread. Well, that was the day during the as we're having this discussion, I was not reading the AI news. The same day is when OpenAI was like, actually, we've now added image generation inline into GPT so you can have it follow the same thread and have the context of your thread to generate the image. And I'm like, man, that my now news was like 3 hours old, and I missed out on this incredible capability that's being developed that would have changed our entire conversation from earlier that day. So it's like, well, I guess I'm going to revisit that now. And that's what enterprises need to learn to do, but they're just not that nimble to make that change. Be like, oh, well, let's think about this entire thing again and reinvest in that POC because now it might work.
Yeah, I love that point. And, we kind of live that every day. We use AI to create our solutions, our AI solutions. So it sounds a tiny bit meta, AI to create AI, but the advancements, for a while I was using Codex, and then Claude Code became, and certain things you could do, like Shanti said, you just couldn't do, and you go back and you see the improvements, and all of a sudden, the kinds of coding you can do has changed significantly. So, love that point.
Yeah, it's funny. I had actually 2 months ago, I'd given up on Codex because I don't really need another CLI type solution. I don't need one that doesn't integrate. And at the end of last week, they're like, oh, actually, you can now use Codex inside of VS Code. And here's the key part. It will use your existing subscription. So take that cursor where you have to subscribe separately and use their credits. Oh, I'm already paying for this subscription. Now I can just plug it in and use it. All of a sudden, I'm back using Codex again. Now, that's okay. Yeah, still not my favorite, but it's using my existing subscription, and I'm willing to give it a shot.
Yeah, I love that. Again, the lesson here is just have that ability, and maybe it's the centralized team that we were talking about earlier, that somebody's evaluating, what you couldn't do before, now you can do. That's a continuous kind of cycle. One of the other things we do is just providing a spotter's guide. Where is the low-hanging fruit that typically drives AI ROI, right? And so your mileage is going to vary based on your organization, but repetitive decision making, slow manual processes, almost that grind. An example might be that benefits company we're talking about. When you sign up, your organization signs up for benefits. That's a very can be very human intensive, entering everybody's social security numbers, everybody's addresses, and all their selections and the things they've made. And they made the joke, you almost inevitably, if you miss anybody or mess anybody up in the organization, it's the CEO or the significant other of the CEO, somebody really important that really reflects on the organization. So these slow manual processes, the grind, or you're getting inconsistent quality or outcomes. And an interesting example might be what we're doing with AB InBev, and their global insights team. And so really their challenge was, we have great analysts. They give us great insights, but we have so many geographies. They can really serve our highest performing products, our highest performing geographies, and we have a lot of places of the business not being served. And so could we use agentic AI to help us kind of augment those humans and extend their reach into broader parts of the business? And that's the expert scarcity you see on the bottom right-hand side. So, as you're going through this process of identifying your use cases, leverage some sort of spotter's guide, and you can create your own version of this in your organization of what you've typically seen work, and you can get very specific. So other parts of the organization, in a good way, right? And so that's the other part of this, is being able to, as part of that organizational change management, tell the story of how solutions came about your organization. How did they start? What were the lessons learned? And kind of where is that solution going down the road? And could it be leveraged potentially in other parts of the organization? And again, at the bottom, if you're not solving a particular business problem, then you really have to question why you're doing it. And again, oftentimes we see this where maybe it was successful technology, but it's not moving the business needle for whatever reason, or just as likely, to Shanti's point, there's no benchmark set, no way to in an ongoing way, measure the value of a particular solution, so that you're constantly delivering back to the business the value of a particular solution. And the last thing I'll say here, and Situ, I'd love for you to talk about the Wendy's example, maybe that you just put in chat. Is we talk about being self-funding. So again, I'm going to pick on TA. They used, literally, the way that worked is, at the time, it's different now, and this was actually in their public filings, so we can talk about it. 1 penny of improved cents per gallon across their network was $20 million in EBITDA. And come to find out, there were pennies everywhere, right? And so that revenue generation was actually used to fund the next AI use case, which is more focused on optimizing supply to locations, and then other use cases. So you can almost create a startup within your organization that leverages AI to generate those savings. So it's a self-funding roadmap. I'll just pause there. Professor Sithu, do you want to say anything about Wendy's?
Not beyond, what I said. I mean, this is an
Okay.
interesting story I heard at that same conference that I mentioned
Yeah.
sometime back.
Yeah.
That was an interesting take they had on this, saying, well, if they could outsource the actual taking of the orders to the agent, as long as the agent was doing a good job, of course, then that freed up the clerk's time to do real customer service, like, smiling at customers, saying thank you, and so on. So it was a substitute for the so-called aspects of the service experience, which were detracting from the real places where you had to shine. That's what they said.
So I love that point. Shanti and I are actually doing work, and we're doing some PR, so we can talk about them. Western Construction here in St. Louis. It's a 5th generation company. They came to us and actually, took an executive seminar at WashU. And their point was, what if we could optimize and know who's going to win bids? Like, what bids we're going to win? What customers do we want to win? Because They pay on time. They do all the right things and save time. And they weren't doing it to save time so they could reduce humans in their business. They were doing it exactly for the point you just made, Professor C. They wanted people to say, okay, I don't want them doing bids we're not going to win. I want them to focus on bids we can win and then spend time in front of other humans, general contractors, building owners, getting to know them, build relationships. So freeing up and having the mundane being done while they can go and do the critical parts of being ambassadors for the business. And so, again, it's a great story. I would argue Western, again, here in St. Louis, fifth generation company is going to be a real pioneer in the construction industry. And in all the things they want to do with the AI use cases and these business opportunities we were talking about is embedded in their values. So their question was, how can we improve the customer experience? How can we improve our employees' experience? How can we free them up to do the things they love to do, not the things they have to do just to keep the business going? Let's turn that over to the AI. So again, very, very cool company, and based right here in St. Louis. Any other things you want to add to that, Shanti, or any observations, questions from the broader group? If not,
The places AI can have the most impact might not be the most obvious places. I think is maybe one of those things that sometimes it's hard to figure out exactly where this will be useful. And sometimes the things that would be most useful are not problems AI is great at solving today. So those are the ones that might need to be revisited.
Yeah, I love that point. And again, I think, that happens oftentimes. So part of our approach, and again, you can do this on your own as an organization, is getting the business together, key leaders, and start to brainstorm around, we call them use cases. That's kind of a technical term, business opportunities, and building a business case around them. It's like, okay, here's a problem in our business. And we identify these, and to Shanti's point, it might not be a place where AI has any particular ability to help solve it. It might be some other completely different. It might be partnering with another company. It might be doing an acquisition. It might be, hiring 10 more. So when you're doing these workshops, not everything that pops up is like an AI problem. It's not like, you have this hammer and you start hitting everything. This opportunity workshop could have multiple solutions to it. And AI is just one example or one way to help solve it, to your point. So the other thing, and it's kind of interesting, we use this approach to kind of look at two sides of the coin, and this kind of value matrix has been around forever. So not to use a pun, we're AnswerRockets. This isn't rocket science, but you want to get this sense of, okay, what is the value? And so at a high level, you start to plot these, what use cases are we going to attack first, second, third, and then you do a deeper dive on, how are we going to calculate the value? How are we going to benchmark how this is performing? So that we know, because again, some of these solutions, you start them in production and they're valuable, but then, let's say it's an ML model and it starts to drift and you need to retrain it. So being able to stay with these solutions and make sure they're evolving over time as the world evolves and as the data evolves, for example. So the value is critically important. And then also the viability, just the time to build, the readiness. And so you start to build, again, what I would encourage you all to do within your organizations is have this roadmap. And it's going to be a living document. You're going to potentially do it initially, and then it's going to evolve over time based on, complexity of use cases, value of use case, and you start to build one, it leads to another. And so that's going to evolve. But having that idea of a roadmap in your head and having a very clear set of criteria of how you value them, because in the business, if you do one of these, you're going to find I think, at least based on our experience, everybody thinks their use case is the most valuable and the easiest to build, right? Marketing teams are going to think theirs are the most valuable, sales teams, whoever the case may be. And so being very clear and transparent about how you're evaluating those use cases is critically important, and everybody understands how that's being done. So I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any questions. Shanti, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think the viability of the use case gets pretty interesting, and where you are in your AI maturity should decide how viable the use case is. Because if you're not a mature AI organization, you have to pick something that you're more likely to succeed with. So go high on the viability, even if the ROI isn't quite as high, because you need to show that quick win. What can we actually successfully accomplish using the technology to show the technology is capable? And as you get more mature, you can start to take a little more risk and pick use cases that have less viability but have more ROI. So trying to create that balance is something that you can do based on your organization's level of maturity, how acceptable AI has already been, whether you've had success before, start to come into play.
Yeah, no, I love that point. And the other thing here, we were talking about, kind of the business value and the self-funding. The other thing that's happening as you're doing this is you're building capability. Maybe you're building just really quickly the LLM infrastructure that you need and the inference infrastructure and all the pieces that go with it, or you're creating the data lake piece by piece, but you're doing it by delivering business value. So you're building out that infrastructure based on the value you're delivering to the business. So you're getting more mature in your overall technical capability, your governance capability, so that you start to, pick up momentum. And I always hated the snowball analogy, but it starts to become a snowball where you're becoming more and more mature, you're developing more and more capability, and you can start to leverage that across the business and actually start to scale. And that goes to that scale question earlier. We've seen organizations kind of flip that and almost do a build it and they will come, build a massive, and I'm just going to say Snowflake, it's not Snowflake's fault, build a massive Snowflake infrastructure. And it just, the business doesn't come. It doesn't match business requirements. The data is kind of right, but it takes more time to get it right to actually deliver value than if they had no warehouse at all. So really building it in the context of business value is important versus that build it and hope they come. All right. So it's kind of interesting. We hit on this a little bit, and Shanti was talking about context is key. Again, maybe this is a blinding statement of the obvious, but these LLMs have been trained generally on the internet, right? Everything from War and Peace to, maybe whatever, right? It's all out there. So it really has no context around your business rules, the guardrails you want. And Shanti was talking about, even the context window. So setting the context and starting to build a persistent understanding of your business. For example, we have a platform, an accelerator we call Max. One of the things it's doing is constantly in the background is setting context. As users are asking prompt, it reminds the model of the context, of the understanding of the business, the terminology, and again, making sure that the right data activation or the right function calls are happening. If this question requires a specific set of SQL, or this question requires asking a machine learning model a particular question, then it does that and it ensures it does that. And so when you ask the question or a very close variation of the question multiple times, you get the same answer. And it has the built-in compliance and it has the policies and guardrails in place, and it allows you again to use the ABI example as have institutional knowledge really spread and extended through an agentic AI capability. So it's operating as a junior, an analogy might be a junior analyst as part of that team, but overseen by somebody more senior. And again, having that human in the loop to verify the output. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions. Usually there's questions here. So if nobody asks questions, and I know I've done a poor job of presenting the slides, so you have my emotional well-being in your hands. I'm kidding. But any questions on this?
While people are thinking of their questions, I will just random content around guardrails, because
Yeah.
guardrails can be a lot of different things. When we talked about RAG earlier, that's a set of guardrails, right? You're trying to prevent hallucination by limiting context to a certain amount of information and saying, summarize this information. Guardrails can also be rules around how you ground the outputs. So you can take the output and compare that output to certain sets of rules, or you can take that output, pass the output through another model, and have basically do LLM as a judge. Have the model say, based on this input and this output, do you think these things go together? Did you actually answer the right question? So guardrails can be a lot of different things. Guardrails can be security rules around, are we putting proprietary information back out into the world that we shouldn't be giving to these users? So actually going through the content of output and saying, is there something potentially unsafe in this output? If you look at some of the current like text to image generation, there's a bunch of guardrails about the types of images that can be generated or not generated. And that's not generally happening on the way in. It tends to happen on the way out, where somebody actually, like a model is now looking at an image saying, does this image that's been generated violate some terms of service or whatever these principles are?
Yeah, and I just saw a question pop up. Maybe the questioner could add a little context to it, because I think, Shanti, you were kind of headed down that path, but I saw it really quick come and go. So could the questioner?
Well, there's one of the ethical risks about Gen AI and customer-facing products. And, that's an interesting question in general, because there's lots of things that happen in business that may or may not be ethical, depending on your perspective and what that means. Gen AI specifically probably has to do with, are you telling a human that they're not talking to another human, that their answers are coming from a machine that is really just randomly putting words together? And how culpable or liable are you as a company willing to be for whatever that output is? There've been some famous cases of people, I guess somebody got like a airline discount by asking, or a car discount by asking an early stage LLM to, provide it one, and some things of that nature. So are you going to abide by whatever the model produces in terms of output? Does the person know who they're talking to? I think about it in the old context of like phone trees, where I have to sit there listening to 5 choices to get to the one that I want, that are all played very slowly. Well, one of the industry secrets is, part of the reason they play those phone trees is to give the operators that are actually talking to people more time to have those conversations. They want you to be sitting there for a long time, because they can't handle that volume and pace that would normally come through. The same thing can be said for generative AI. Right? Do you try to engage somebody in longer conversations and draw them into giving you more information just to keep them occupied longer before a human can then make a decision on them, or maybe get them so frustrated that they stop the interaction and give up, which is another potentially, I would say, unethical use of generative AI? Is, can we frustrate customers enough, not so much that they quit, but enough that they don't use our customer service resources?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Probably could have its own session, and oftentimes many times does at conferences. But where I would start with it too is, I always worry when we engage with clients that don't start with, okay, here's our values, here's who we want to be, here's who we've been in the market for the last 10 years, 100 years, whatever the case may be. And we want AI to fit into that ethical framework. And this is what it means. This is how we treat our customers. Here's our policies. Forgetting AI, here's how we interact. And in starting there as the ethical foundation here in St. Louis, That's been a core part of their tenet. Everything we do with AI, we want to be an extension of who we've been since 1915 when they were founded, right? So that's number one. Number two is as you put these solutions together, you have to have a diverse point of view on committees that are looking at this, because what's ethical to somebody with one background may look very different to somebody with another background, and you have blind spots, literal blind spots, and you start to create situations that you didn't even realize you were creating. So having a diverse set of humans on your AI governance committee, and typically that's ethics is a part of that governance committee, is critically important to have that full point of view. Now, having said that, all the things Shanti says make sense, and having the guardrails, but oftentimes where these things run off the rails, if you will, is that lack of foundation, that lack of diverse point of view that then propagates itself into the technology.
Yeah, and if we bring it to like a real world example where people were getting super concerned when Delta said they were going to do AI guided pricing. Now, as some people who've done AI guided pricing in the past, we're okay with that. But at some point, does it become not okay? Now, the concern from people who didn't know what Delta's plans were was that they would use personal information, your income, your job, whatever, to set your pricing. So at what point do you go from clever lifetime value marketing, where we figure out who's going to be loyal and will still buy this, to, well, we can charge you more because you can afford to pay more? And at what, like, where do you cross that ethical threshold around, could a model have access to this information because the decision it can make based on that information is not something that we're willing to do?
Yeah, I love that point. Love that point. I'm just going to quickly go here too. So this is again one where I think if you were to spend some time organizationally really understanding what LLMs do well, and realizing what they don't do well, keeping in mind what Shanti said, that what they don't do well today may very well change, with the next drop at GPT or Gemini, or pick your favorite model. So being able to constantly evaluate, but know what LLMs do really well and not well. And so, for example, we did have a client that was trying to get an LLM to do some very kind of predictive ML kinds of capabilities, right? And they were very frustrated because it wasn't working the way they thought. And then, combining the two, having an ML model called by a large language model, really helped them resolve that with their particular set of solutions. And again, they had business analysts asking these predictive questions around particular customers. So combining the two, understanding how they combine, and understanding this kind of architecture, this function calling architecture, I would argue from a technology perspective is really important if you're a technologist. So it's not just the LLM, but it's the ability to start calling out. And you can actually see this, by the way. I mean, you see this with your models where it may go out and search the internet, or may go out and do a specific thing. And it's starting to be not just, I make a request, it goes out, retrieves it, and sends it back, but it's starting to loop and do things in the background, especially with the more sophisticated models, if you're creating like a research report, for example. And so this is, I think, really important. Once you get that business problem, then understanding what the models do well, don't do well, and combining them in a way that gives you the best solution. Again, Shanti, I know this is an area of expertise of yours, so anything you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I mean, we want to make the outputs from traditional data science, I love saying traditional, like it's so old.
I know, it's so old, I know.
Available. And if the way people will interface with them is through an LLM, then we have methods for doing that. And that starts to get to be very interesting, right? Where we can make data science more accessible. We'll still have high quality models that make great predictions. We just access them a little bit differently, rather than have to embed that in software. So we make it available to an LLM. So it's really more of an interface design change. And that's pretty interesting. Like having a method of communicating that people are already familiar with now have more powerful, predictable results. I think is one of the ways that we're going to see generative AI become a little more deterministic, because what it's really doing is just becoming an interface to other things.
Spot on. Yeah, it's interesting. And, Shanti and I often, now that we have this, when we did TA, this is pre-LLM, and we would always get questions. I had a particular time where the president of the company called me, and he had been pricing diesel since Nixon was president. I mean, literally been pricing it forever. And he could always explain why he priced certain ways and, what if this or what if that. And there was no real way to interrogate the model to really understand why was it raising 15 cents, raising the price 15 cents, in Effingham, Illinois. And so having this ability to interrogate and ask and do these what ifs really would have been really powerful back then, and probably saved me a few Sunday night, late night calls or early Monday morning calls. So great point. Love that, Shanti. Any questions, observations on this? All right, and I know we're headed for time, but one of the things I just want to say around this slide is have a set of design decisions that you make consistently and document them. You don't have to be perfect in all of this, but just understand what are the kinds of decisions you need to make. How do you make those decisions? Who makes them is critically important so that it's done, consistently. And if you do something that's not within the best practice or the norm of the business, you're doing it for a particular reason. It's not because you didn't know or because nothing's documented. You're making decisions using a framework that's consistent, that's transparent, and is also repeatable. And so helping, it goes to that scale question earlier, which was a great question. How do you scale? Well, it's consistency. You're making decisions in the same way. We have the same decision framework, and we have these common set of decisions we need to make. And understanding that every one of these decisions, as you make trade-offs, there's no perfect answer, right? You're optimizing for cost or performance or quality, speed to value, and different decisions you may optimize for those different components, different variables differently, depending on the particular solution. But the thing I would encourage here is have a framework, have a consistent point of view, and maybe it's that centralized team we were talking about initially that puts this together, but it gets pushed out into the organization so there's consistency. And
Hey,
then,
Andy, I had a quick question.
absolutely.
On that previous slide,
Yep.
what are those acronyms under frameworks?
Yeah, let me go back. Oh, I got to go back. So yeah, sorry. I violated my acronym rule tremendously. So you're looking at frameworks. Yeah, MCP. So these are the frameworks on how agents can interact. So I can have a Salesforce agent talk to a Microsoft Teams agent, for example. And
Yes. MCP is your model context protocol, and that's going to be how through one specific model can I interface with lots of other services.
Yep.
So each of those services makes a standard, think of it like APIs for models. Like you've got a standard protocol available so that you have a specific way you specify the context to that next service. ACP is part of Google's version of that. So just your agent client protocol. A to A is agent to agent. Same idea. So A to A is how are the agents going to talk to each other. ACP is how do you specify context specifically to agents, which gets into at what point is it a workflow, at what point is it an agent? And it's about, well, agency, for lack of a better term, which is the model making a decision on its own of what to do next, of what it's going to use. So it's got choices of tools, choices of models to talk to, choices of other agents to talk to, and you have a model that's making that decision versus you have a workflow that says you go and do this, you give me the results. I go and do this, I get the results. I go and do that, I get the results. That's a workflow. Yeah, the overarching piece does not need to make any decisions. It has tools, it can use them. I'm working on a paper called Your Workflow is Not an Agent, and that's okay, because not every workflow is an agent.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Shanti. That's awesome. And thanks for the question. All right. So then, the other kind of set of decisions you need to make is, not all solutions or use cases are ideal for being handled by AI or automation. Especially, critical ones, medical diagnoses. And again, it may be augmented. You may augment the human decision maker by giving them input. An interesting example, again, this is in the diesel industry, a little more, not as high risk, unless, of course, you're the CEO of one of those companies and your job depends on profitability. But, the way Pilot Flying J did it, they didn't fully automate the process. They get input from algorithms. A human decides what they are going to actually do. So there's suggestions. So, there can be suggestions or a division of workload. And, we were talking about coding, that's a classic division where you let it do some things, you take a look at it, you alternate between, euphoria, man, this thing really did a great job of writing this. And then all of a sudden, you're in the trough of despair because it's done some things that are subtle bugs. And so anyway, really, as you're starting to look at these use cases, where do you have humans involved? Where do you really have AI involved? And again, I would encourage everybody to think about what are things that AI could do that would improve the employee experience, optimize productivity, not because you're taking away the things humans should be doing, but taking away the things that are drudgery, a grind, error prone, repetitive, and free the humans up. That example Professor Sethi mentioned with Wendy's or Western, allowing people to be human to human and letting AI do the things that it's good at. So having some sort of framework around this or division of workload is critically important as well. And it's kind of interesting too. I mean, one of the things we're starting to see, just last thing really quick, again, this home builder, one of the things you do is you set architectural standards for houses in a subdivision. And a lot of that an architect would do, but it's very, very repetitive, very cut and paste. And so we've helped them with a solution that sets those architectural standards for a subdivision using a large language model, but then is certified by an architect. So you, again, almost treating the AI like a junior architect that then needs its work evaluated by a senior architect or a human, right? And so again, it's freeing that architect too up of probably cutting and pasting, a bunch of text that they have in a bunch of different documents, and freeing them up to be real architects.
Yeah, there's some really interesting ways that you can use AI to augment some of these high risk decisions. And part of it is just the order in which you present the AI information. So medical diagnosis is a really good one, right? There's lots of cases. A lot of medical diagnosis is based on what people have seen in the past or what's been reported in literature. Well, AI is super good at summarizing literature and going through all of those cases and finding ones that look very similar. But if you were to present somebody with that information ahead of time, you'd probably get them stuck on that particular thing. And then it's hard, they have cognitive biases. It's hard to move off of that. They've been anchored to it for, I think that's the term that they use in the literature for that kind of thing. But if you were to make them, the human gives their diagnosis first, then show them the AI diagnosis. And if they're different, say, would you consider this? Or, give them the reason why and see where it goes. That could be a really good way to have somebody consider something else. So that could get pretty darn interesting. There's some stats on hiring decisions that are AI guided, came out in a newsletter I was reading earlier today. And it seems like AI was slightly more fair and was a little less biased than the human interviewers were. So that was kind of interesting to see. Part of it is just how it does its evaluations. But you also have to think that humans are the ones deciding what evaluation criteria you want the AI to use.
Mm.
So it'll also pick up on some of that as bias. If you code some subtle bias into your evaluation criteria, then you're still going to see it.
Great point. This is the final slide, and again, this really kind of summarizes a lot of the things we were talking about. Is really identify those use cases, obsess on the problem, not the solution, focus on the business challenges, really consider the competitive landscape. Again, sometimes we're dealing with clients that have had big wake-up calls, and losing to competitors that they didn't even know were competitors or weren't competitors 2 years ago, but have sprung up out of the woodwork or out of somebody's basement, and now are competing and taking business. And then validate those use cases to understand, again, benchmarking, and what the value is, and again, making your AI strategy part of your overall broader business strategy, and then prioritizing those use cases, those opportunities. And really the idea here ultimately becomes this self-funding roadmap if you're doing this well. And as you're in the prove out, don't be afraid to stop. Don't beat your head against the wall. Like Shanti was saying, maybe you stop, and you go do other use cases, and you come back to this one because now the capabilities in the LLMs or whatever the case may be, or your data is improved, or you find third-party data. So don't beat your head against the wall. Have those go no-go gates as you're proving things out, but keep those learnings in the organization, and then really think about how do you do the organizational change management? How do you build the organizational capability? And so that's what we had for today. Again, I can't thank CABI enough for having us. Great group, great questions. If there are any other questions that you have, I know we're at time, but it's been fantastic, and thank you, Professor Sithu, Katie, for inviting us.
Yeah, we are right on time. I think you finished perfectly well. This was just absolutely fantastic. I greatly enjoyed this, Andy and Shanti. Appreciate this. I'm sure, participants must have a lot of value out of these
Awesome.
use cases and the landscape you sketched. More importantly, before we sign off, the recording will be made available by Katie to all the participants and those who are not able to join today. So with that, we'll draw this to a close. Let's thank Andy and Shanti for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Bye.
both.
Enjoy the rest of your day, people. Bye-bye.
And thank you everyone for joining us.
See you guys.